Welcome to the Associated Church Press podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder. This is a space where professionals in Christian media share real stories, successes, challenges, and lessons learned so we can connect, collaborate, and grow together in today's changing media landscape. Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to have Jessica Brodie, who is the editor of the South Carolina United Methodist Advocate, in the studio today. And we get to talk not only about the Advocate, but also about this amazing series of Christian romance novels that you've been writing. So welcome to the program, Jessica.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, and when I saw, I think you had sent me a press release on your newest book, which is it Tangled Roots? Is that the latest one?
Newest one is Hidden Seeds.
Hidden Seeds. Okay. And I started to read, this is the third book in your Dahlia series. And
Yeah.
I thought, what an interesting intersection
Mm.
of writing and journalism and Christianity,
Yeah,
and how you're balancing all that with your day job. So in some ways, it's such an interesting way that you're using all these channels to kind of live your faith. And
yeah,
so I wanted to talk to you about that and sort of how you reach out to others and sort of what's in your head about those things.
absolutely.
So first, let's talk a little bit about The Advocate, because you have been the editor for a couple years now.
Yes,
And tell
16
us a little bit about The Advocate and sort of where that sits in South Carolina United Methodist lore.
Absolutely. Well, the Advocate, I've been here for 16 years. I actually took the position 16 years ago this month. So it's literally
Happy anniversary!
thank you. And I moved to South Carolina for the position, and it has just it has been an absolute blessing in my life. The Advocate started in 18. It originated in 1836, but its first edition was in 1837, and its purpose was essentially to be a Southern voice to Methodism at the time. You know, they had
Hmm.
another advocate and it was elsewhere, and they felt like they needed some regional advocates. And so that's how we started. And it has gone since then. Currently, we are the oldest newspaper in Methodism that's still in existence. And we still are a print newspaper, as well as we have a huge digital presence. And we've just started video reels, and we're launching our app, we hope, this weekend, but we're pivoting in all sorts of ways. But we still are a print newspaper, which is somewhat of a rarity, I think, but it's exciting.
Well, and I think there's certainly a lot to be said, especially in the Christian press for print newspapers, because oftentimes they're disseminated through the churches themselves. So it's a very sort of personal relationship, and people are picking that up and interacting. So have
Mm.
you also seem like with your app and with some of the other pieces that the Advocate is disseminating information. How are you seeing over your 16 years the way you're interacting with people changing?
Well, people definitely now seem to need a lot more interaction, and the way they're consuming news is different. You know, it used to be that people would receive, we're a monthly publication. Over the years,
Mhm.
you know, we've been, I think, weekly at some point, and but now we are a monthly publication. So people seem to need things more, you know, just more frequently, more emails, more touching, you know, more interaction generally. And not just print and not just long form journalism, but snippets and bite-sized pieces and a lot more
Mhm.
photography and things like that. And so we just thought that you know, really we need to be storytellers. We need to be sharing the news any way we can. So even though writing is the way I was trained, it's my most comfortable, it doesn't mean that we can't try other ways to get information out. And we have a unique relationship with the United Methodist Church generally. So I'm a United Methodist, our staff, our board, we're all United Methodist, but we're technically separate from in the United Methodist Church. Our state is actually in a conference. So all of South
Hmm.
Carolina is in the South Carolina conference. And so we're actually independent from the conference. So we get some conference funding, but it's about a sixth of our budget. So the rest of it comes from ads and subscriptions. So it gives us editorial independence and just the ability to kind of quickly pivot when we need to, when we feel like it's something that we want to do. And that's been kind of it's busy and it takes a lot of work, but it's also really exciting just to be able to figure out what your readers are wanting and then try to do it if you can. So
So, what are your readers wanting these days? I mean, because I do think it's so denominational press services have such a unique relationship with their readers, and they're held to a different, like, yes, you need to deliver the news, but you're a monthly, so you're not doing breaking news. You're doing so. Tell me a little bit about that interplay. Like, what are people looking for in from the Advocate?
well, it changes over time, and it seems right now that maybe a couple of years ago, everyone was very hungry for news about the schism, the disaffiliation, the
Sure.
split in the UMC. And not a lot of information was being shared in our conference. And people they were getting misinformation. And so they really wanted at least something, just are there lawsuits? What is the latest? Have someone talk about something so that they could pray better or make educated decisions or whatever it is they needed to do. And so that's what we gave then. But now people seem to be very hungry for more encouragement and inspiration.
Hmm.
And they want to see they know that news is news, but they want to see evidence of God's people working in the world doing beautiful things, whatever that looks like, new things, new ministries, new ways that people are partnering and more young voices, more people on the fringes. How are we being God's church? And what does that look like today in a practical way so that we can all come together and not be, I guess, saddled by some of the heaviness and the weight and the depression of the past, but how can we look toward the future in a better way? I personally love telling this sort of stories, so it's really a fun time for me to be able to do that.
Well, and what strikes me is that it's very much like the power of the individual. And when the world does seem heavy or maybe like the world's on fire, we kind of contract a little into what are those inspirational stories that can give us hope, that can show us a pathway forward, and really recognize that it's not that people make up those systems. And
Exactly.
sort of feels like that's kind of the emphasis that you're heading towards.
Mhm. Yeah, and some of the stories, yeah, I'm the primary writer, so some of the stories I'm writing, it might be we had a really neat story about a pastor who every day he walks his dog, and that is his designated time to talk with the Lord, and he was walking his dog, and he just had this epiphany that we need to every Sunday we always say, "Okay, it's time to leave for the church to leave the building." And then he realized, what if we actually left the building together and went into the community and did these little group mission ministry type things
Oh,
together.
how
They went
interesting.
to retirement homes and they painted flower boxes and they rebuilt and perked up and started new blessing boxes and just all of these things. They clean people's yards. But then other stories I don't write and they just come to me. And that is really neat. So, one of my favorite stories from the June paper that we just launched, and I just released a video reel on it this morning, is something called the Laundry of Love Ministry. And I had no idea until they sent it to me that there was this church in the center of the state, right in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And the pastor had this passion for people who sometimes have to pick between doing their laundry and putting food on the table. So he
Mm.
started a Laundry of Love ministry. And so they collect dryer sheets and they basically do people's laundry at a laundromat for free. And so, I mean, those are great. People love those stories. They give you
Absolutely.
ideas.
And so actually I wanted those individual stories and people sort of making a difference in their communities. That really feels like the hallmark of your book series. And I was especially taken with I was reading the synopsis of your very first one. I think it was The Memory Garden. Was that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
About, it started off like the Hallmark movie, but then I really loved how you wove themes of just community living without like, and just sort of soft spirituality and a recognition of the different characters' Christian faith. And so I'm
Mhm.
interested in how, where you get inspired for those sorts of stories because it feels a little bit like there's some themes that you could pull out of The Advocate and bring into books like that. So,
Definitely. I as a writer, I write from all aspects of my life. And I think that writers usually have to be very good observers, but they also have to have lived life. And,
mhm,
this is actually I've been writing fiction. I wrote my first novel at 21 years old. That was 30 years ago. I'm 51 today. And the first one was practice, the second one, it was secular, and but this is the third book, The Memory Garden, and that is the one that was, the other two didn't make it, but these three books, it's funny how, when life just sort of intersects at that perfect moment, God opens the doors for those stories to be told. And so, absolutely, if uh, it took me entirely too long to realize how much of what I do at the Advocate is woven into all of the characters, all the town. It's a fictional town. There is no Dahlia, South Carolina, but this town is sort of a hodgepodge creation of all the towns I've been to over 16 years as a Christian journalist, going and being able to stand in a sanctuary while people are putting together boxing up meals for Rise Against Hunger, or going
mhm,
around the back to where they have a little trailer and they're setting up bottles of shampoo for homeless people to take, and so over the years, all of those stories have just woven their way into these characters. And I think in a way that's what makes them come to life. A lot of my readers have said, they feel like real people. And I think it's because they are inspired by real life. And
mhm,
so the first book, The Memory Garden, is about a journalist who was in New York and hit rock bottom. Absolutely, at the lowest of all low points, lost her job, her fiance, everything, has a mental health crisis, has to move back to the last place in the world she ever wanted to be, which is this tiny little Dahlia, South Carolina, where everybody says, oh, bless you, and all of those things. And, she's just so cynical. And she takes a job at the local town paper that's failing. And so that becomes sort of her healing process, and she meets a little boy who is, on the surface, the polar opposite of her. She's
mhm,
white, 40 years old, blonde. And she comes from a well-off family. He is 11 years old, African American, living in poverty, and has some really dark secrets that he doesn't want anybody to know. He's also more the caregiver of his Mima, his grandmother,
mhm,
than she is of him because she's sick and his mom has passed away. So, but he ends up starting a summer camp. She does a story on him. They become unlikely friends. And through that, she ends up helping him. He ends up helping her. And so, and what's interesting is that the summer camp he started, and I say this in the acknowledgments of the book, is that it was actually inspired by the Children's Defense Fund's Freedom School, which is, just a phenomenal program. And so, know that he didn't start Freedom School, but he started a program that reminded me of me going to cover and take pictures of these kids, doing Harambe every morning, and,
mhm.
just the way they dive into topics together in spite of whatever their life circumstances are. So, So it's just
Well,
been really neat to see it come to life.
and what I really liked about that particular book was just the interplay between the characters, that it wasn't just, "Okay, here I'm the editor, and so I shouldn't have all the answers," but it really is that give and take, and she's being shaped by her experiences. And I thought that was a very, humble is a word that jumps to mind, but just a very, sort of holistic view of how we all operate in the world, that everyone has something to give, but also to receive. And
Yeah.
so as you're kind of building, those characters, I how do you how do you see that shape happen? Do you sort of know, like, "Okay, I want this to occur?" Do you have more of a dialogue with the characters as you're writing them? What's your process like?
Well, I was a really shy kid when I was young, and so I did theater in high school, and and I moved around a lot. So that really took me, brought me out of my shell. But for
Yeah.
me, I start books from the characters, and it's almost
Mhm.
like doing a play, just being on stage in theater. And I start to identify with a character, and it doesn't matter if it's a female. I mean, I have male characters and people of other races and everything and ages. So I start with them, and I try to figure out, what do I want? What makes me as a character tick? I try to embody
Mhm.
that and really try to understand, which is what I try to do with people in life. Try to, meet someone where they are and really understand, because we're all connected through the Holy Spirit. So we should all kind of have a connection. So it's the same thing with the characters. And from there, the plot evolves. I always have a plot, but I am not a stickler. I don't stick to it. So I'm sort of a
Mhm.
plantser, meaning a plotter and a pantser. A pantser is someone who flies by the seat of their pants and doesn't really make up a plot. And a plotter is someone who has a full outline. And I do both. So I have the outline, but I want to have the freedom that if I'm writing and God lays something on my heart and somebody needs to get arrested or somebody needs to get sick or hurt or something else needs to happen that I didn't see coming, I'm just as surprised sometimes as the readers are with the direction that a scene goes. And so yeah, I mean, I try to leave plenty of room for that, but it all starts from the characters and figuring out who they are, what do they want, what are their weaknesses. So
And to me, that feels very journalistic in some ways. Like you're creating a character and then getting to know them. And when you're out in the wild doing journalism, you very often that is, you're coming in with kind of no expectations. You're getting to know that individual that you're covering and sharing. And so, how do you think your journalism background has influenced you as a writer?
hmm. Yeah, I think it is. That's a good point about, and I hadn't thought about it that way. But yeah, I do think that getting to know genuinely and authentically trying to seek what what is the story here? What are the motivations of the character? What are the fears? And also trying to bring it to life on the page in a way that's very authentic. One thing, I'm a huge reader. My mother tells me I have been reading since I was 2 because I used to get really impatient that she wouldn't read, she was "Billy, I can't read 25 books a night, Jessica." So she would I apparently just
But
took
you can.
so, but I'm a lifelong reader and I love fiction. Fiction is my favorite. I read every genre. I'm, not shy about switching around. But one of the things about books that bothers me is when things are too perfect, things are too squeaky
Mhm.
clean, and where it just doesn't feel real. It just feels flat. The even if the character is flawed, you just feel like, oh, I saw this coming, or it just doesn't feel right. Or if they're trying to show like my 3rd book deals with a woman who's come out of sex trafficking, so it's like,
Mhm.
I don't wanna make that look pretty or on the flip side, so bad that no one that it's almost seems like fiction. I want it to seem like real life because I write contemporary fiction, and
Mhm.
I think that that helps people understand others and understand that the world that they're living in and some of the issues that we face today. So, as a journalist, I try to make the town, I don't know, come to life. I want you to smell what it smells like and hear the sounds that are going on, and I want you to know that maybe this person might have look like her hair isn't out of place and she's perfectly dressed, but she has secrets that she's not telling anyone and she's holding on tight and she's at the end of her rope. And so, how can I reveal that in a way that's not too over the top and tells you everything, but
Mhm.
evolves naturally and
Well,
authentically?
and also there are very few people that just kinda come on out and tell you everything about themselves all at once. It's a continuing evolutionary process of kind of unfolding as you build trust. And so I think that that kind of comes through in how you're writing, in how you're writing those characters and how you're shaping that town.
Yeah.
Um, and so you've now had 3 books in the same town, and I wanna get to your devotionals and your other types of books, but let's linger here for a minute. What are you seeing as the arc now that you have this trilogy? Do you think that you'll go and there were a lot of kind of meaty characters around the edges that I thought, "Oh, is she going here? Is she going there?" But do you feel like you're gonna stay in Dahlia, South Carolina, or what's next?
So I have a book 4 on the horizon. My daughter's starting college this fall. She's my youngest daughter, and so I'm gonna have a little time on my hands and a little mama adjustment to do, so I plan to write book 4 this fall, and it's a continuation in the Dahlia series. But I have other worlds too, other ideas. So I'm not only staying in Dahlia, but right now, yes. And, but one of my favorite writers is a writer named Lisa Wingate. She is the writer that I first realized that you could write Christian fiction the way I like to read Christian fiction. Just it can deal with gritty issues and authentic things that and real characters that resonate. And so what I liked about her books, and I've met her in person, I was blessed to meet her, and I wrote her when the books came out, and she gave me some wonderful, encouragement. But what I liked about her books was that she'll create a world and then unleash characters into the
Oh,
world.
fun.
Every book is really about a different person. So, but you see some of these characters come back as side characters, and I loved that idea. So I decided to try that with mine, and that's what I've done. And other writers use the same technique. She's just one that I really like. But so for book 1, it's about Rebecca and Devin. Book 2, Rebecca has a reporter named Tiff that drives her crazy for most of the first book, but she's a sleeper character who really has a wonderful arc. Well, she's sort of the star of book 2, and it's the story of her relationship with her brother. She's a Christian and had always gone the straight and narrow path. They were raised in a very dysfunctional, alcoholic home, lots of abuse going on, and he ended up committing a hate crime and going to prison, but he found
Mm.
Christ behind bars. He genuinely did. She doesn't believe him for a second, but he really did. And so it's about the mending of their relationship, but then what does it actually look like to be a new creation in Christ? And so, it's their story. And then book 3, but in book 2, Devin's still there, and Devin gets to know the brother, and Rebecca and Tiff are friends and they hang out. And so, you still have everybody in this universe. And then book 3, it's the same thing where it's another character and then a new one you haven't met yet. And then book 4 will be about Marla, who is the pastor's wife, and her and I won't say too much because I'm still working the book details out in my head, but a character we haven't met yet from Marla's past. So,
That's
so everyone just kind of floats around in the same universe, but different people get to be the stars.
Yeah, well, and I think it would be kind of awkward to have a brand new set of characters in the same small town, like Dahlia's not that big, to be
Yeah,
honest.
true.
So, but how do you keep track of all the idiosyncrasies of those characters? In some ways, I wonder, like, do you have index cards with like, okay, favorite color blue, just to keep continuity, or are they becoming such, friends of yours in your head that you kind of know, like, this is my group over here, and I know how they're all going to interact.
Well, I did make a Pinterest board for the main character, Natalie, in my 3rd book, but that was my one and only time I did that. So honestly, everybody else, it's just instinctive. If they become, I had imaginary friends when I was a kid, They had the most bizarre names. I'll reveal them. Their names were Making Butter and Teresa, and they lived in
I
my
love that.
closet. I know. Anyway, but they were real to me. So for me, when this is sort of like grown-up imaginary friends.
Mhm.
When you're a fiction writer, when you're a novelist, you get to come up with these new friends that you make, and they feel real to me, and they have their own personalities. And just like I wouldn't uh forget, my best friend or my husband or my kids' likes and dislikes and favorite colors in real life, it's the same thing with the characters. So
Mhm.
most of it's instinctive.
Well, and I feel like you bring this empathy like they are your friends. They may not always be lovable characters or all aspects are not, but no one is all lovable all the time.
Nope.
You're bringing light and dark in there. And so it feels like, they're all people that you would know.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to take a step back and talk about the devotionals. You've written lots of other things. So, of course, you're thousands of articles that you've written for the news outlet, but you also have a book of devotionals. You have blog posts. You like if you look on Jessica Brodie author, if you just Google Jessica Brodie author, you'll get to your website, which is jessicabrodie.com, and you have a lot of content out there. So how are you getting it all to fit in, and sort of what's your strategy and what are you trying to achieve with all the different things you're doing?
That's a very good question. So a few years ago, I had the opportunity in South Carolina. They do a wonderful United Methodist men's spiritual retreat, and sometimes I'm the
Mhm.
lone woman that's there, and I'm with a bunch of my brothers and and just watching them. But there was a speaker, and I cannot even remember his name, but he stood on stage and he had a waffle and he took a bottle of syrup. And he said, remember, when you're pouring your syrup in, you can't just keep the syrup in one square. It's going to overlap. And so he made the
Mm,
point that that is how it is in our Christian life. We have to understand that that really there's a lot of overlap in all the different areas. And I think when we become spiritually mature, that is more so than when we're less spiritually mature. So for me, everything that I do is all knitted together with Jesus at the center. And the fiction is essentially bringing some of these themes to life through characters. I think Jesus taught in parables for a reason, and so the characters kind of help us make sense on a personal level of some of the issues. But then I can't stop there because the way I personally make sense out of the world is by writing. When something devastating happens, when I've had a death, like when my father passed away, the first thing I wanted to do was get into a quiet corner and just unload, and just write about it. And that's
mhm,
just the way I tick. So for me, I have a faith blog that comes out every week. And it's not just, a blog or devotionals, it's always kind of, but it's somewhat of that. And that all kind of deals with the same themes as well. And then the devotionals too, sometimes we need, I have had seasons in my life. Sometimes I'm reading a devotional and sometimes I'm not. But I know that there are some times when we need a devotional to really draw closer to God and really just focus on our faith and just go that next step and go to a deeper level. And so yeah, so I've written some devotionals and some other things as well. So it's all part of the same, I guess, just the same message, all the same themes. It's just, I think, a different way of presenting it.
mhm. Well, and I wanted to ask you there were two things that really jumped out at me when you were talking. One is that idea of spiritual maturity, and I think it feels like you're becoming more yourself. And I think as you get older, you just get all the disparate pieces, and I know when I was younger, I felt like, "Oh, well, I'm so compartmentalized," but as I get older, feel like either I'm knitting my narrative together more adroitly, or maybe I am just more coherent, or whatever the case might be, but that idea of spiritual maturity, I'd love to hear more about what that means for you, um, and versus times that you didn't feel as spiritually mature.
Absolutely. I was a Christian when I came to the Advocate to be the editor. I moved here for the position. I had been I'm originally from Miami, Florida. I've moved around a little bit, but I had been living in the mountains, running a secular community weekly newspaper, and
Mm.
I moved to South Carolina for the position, knowing nobody in the state.
Oh,
Other
wow, that's a leap.
Yes, it was a huge leap, and my kids were little at the time. They were 2 and 4, and, so it was definitely a God call, and I wasn't sure why I felt so called to it, but it just made sense. I was a United Methodist. I was born and raised Lutheran, but I had become United Methodist when I was living in the mountains of North Carolina, because that was
Mhm,
the closest church that kind of fit for what I was looking for. So it made sense to go to the United Methodist newspaper. And I was shocked they even had one. But then over the years, just being around so many people of faith,
mhm,
pastors and non-pastors, people who genuinely lived this way, I think some of it just rubbed off because when you are surrounded by people day in and day out who are walking the walk and living the life, how can that not impact you? I'm telling the
mhm,
stories, I'm getting to know them, and some of that good stuff is rubbing off on me. And so, shortly after that, during Lent, I had never done a Lenten challenge. And, I remember thinking, I'm going to read the Bible every day. I had read the Bible all the way through, but I thought, "I'm gonna read the Bible every single day." So I did, and at the time I had little kids. So
right, that's a challenge.
it
You
was
set yourself a challenge.
but I did, and then I realized, okay, well, I wanna keep going, and so that,
Mhm,
little Lenten challenge turned into an everyday habit. Now, I can't I literally cannot not read the Bible every day. It's just
mhm,
part of who I am. It's just part of my grounding and my foundation. Prayer, I used to pray a lot of times for things I wanted or needed, "Please keep me safe on this road trip," that sort of thing, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. But over the years, I've started to realize that it's not just a call, phone into God kind of thing, but it's a conversation. And
mm,
so, being at the Advocate and having the opportunity I mean, it's a tremendous blessing just to be able to tell those stories of God's people at work in the world, and I don't care a thing about denomination. I mean, I love the United Methodist Church, but I mean, this speaks to every person in church, regardless of denomination or theology. But just drawing closer to God and making that part of your life, and you know making it an authentic way of living where
mhm,
you are no longer concealing little sides of yourself, but it is all one big package. It's like a sacrifice of the heart. You've completely surrendered everything in your life to God. And so to me, that has been a game changer. That has absolutely happened for me at the Advocate over these last 16 years. And so this is essentially I think I realized the other day, the expression is that you can't pour out of an empty cup. Well, clearly
mhm,
my cup is full of all of these other people's really great stories, and that's what I'm pouring out of. And so the novels, the articles, the devotionals, the faith blogs every week, some of the videos I do on YouTube and things like that, that's all coming from the same place. So,
and well, and I think that's so important because your spiritual maturity feels like you have been centering God in your life. And so that was I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what it means to have God at the center, Jesus at the center. Um, it feels like your spiritual maturity has just been a continuous progression
it
to
really,
that centering. I'm
really.
curious though how that's changed your relationship with your view on the outside world. You have all these inputs, you're pouring in and putting Jesus at the center, but how does that shape how you relate or interact with people around you?
I think it has made me so much more loving. I feel like I genuinely look at people and I feel like I see the Holy Spirit in them. I feel like I see their best selves or their potential. If somebody does the wrong thing, I feel, you know, I mean, how would I wanna be treated? What if I was having a bad day? Would I want someone to snap at me or judge me for that? So I try to approach things from that. But honestly, I mean, I think love is at the center of it all, and that's what's at the heart of all of these stories is love and grace and mercy and compassion and just pointing to God. And so that to me, that's how I look at other people. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with another writer, and it didn't even occur to me that I shouldn't tell her all of my tricks of the trade, because why would I keep all of that to myself,
Mhm.
and so, do you know what I'm saying? Like just that expansive agape freedom to just share everything with everybody. I don't know.
It's
It's
like in a joy of abundance, really. Like, there is enough for everyone, and you shouldn't gatekeep because there's no need to gatekeep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and so it's hard to describe, it's hard to put words around it, but it's a joyful place to be sitting in. And a few years ago, I wrote a book. I give it away for free on my website. It's called A God-Centered Life, and it's about
Mhm.
exactly that. What can we do every day to just center our lives on God? Every little bit of it. And I think when we do that, it's transformational. It makes us more joyful, more happy. It's not that we're not going through suffering. I mean, we go through suffering. But
Mhm.
it just it's a better way to live
Mhm.
when you're living
Now
the.
I'm curious, I mean, you're so centered on, you feel very centered in how you're approaching your world and the joy and sort of peace that being with God has brought you.
Mhm,
I'm interested, and in each of your books, your characters are finding faith or reconnecting with their faith.
mhm,
How important is that as sort of like almost an evangelical testimonial to have that connection made? Because it doesn't come across to me as like this very overt, like, okay, and now like Paul on the road to Damascus, like there's not a lightning bolt moment. It's more like a subtle growing. So how important is it that your characters find their faith? And when you're working with them, can you ever contemplate a time where someone would turn away from their faith in your book?
hmm. I mean, maybe, but I haven't gotten there yet. Again, I
Mhm.
try to let the characters and what they're going through sort of dictate where the story goes, and I leave room for God to come in and steer me in a whole different direction. But, uh, but yeah, I don't always plan all the God moments and their faith responses, but I do know, like for example, in Hidden Seeds, that is about it's about two women, the friendship of two women, and so one of the women has been utterly betrayed by her best friend and her fiance. And they die in a drunk
Mm,
driving accident, and it's revealed that they were actually in love with each other and
mm,
having a relationship behind her back, and this has absolutely devastated her. And so, in her grief, she knows, she's not completely demolished. She has still hope. She knows still that she's resting in God's hands. So she's able to pray. Even if she doesn't have the
mhm,
word, she's able to have that lifeline that keeps her going. It's not exactly a happy place for her at all.
mhm,
But she has that. Whereas the other one, the other character, she is a single mom, Lainey, who's just come out of a life of human trafficking. She found out that she was pregnant and is a single mom of a little girl who's 4, and for her, she's a new Christian, so she doesn't have that
mhm,
foundation, but for her, it's like, how does she doesn't go through any majorly transformational faith moments, but for her, it's modeled where she is in bed and she's clinging to, in spite of her fears, she's clinging to the promises in scripture. So it's just, sometimes people have an evolution in their faith, and sometimes it's there as the anchor that gets them through the devastating circumstance they're experiencing, or the life change, or the exciting thing. So,
Hmm.
and there's romance in every book. They're not romances, they're contemporary fiction. But I'm a romantic person, and so there's a little romantic plot line in every single one of these. So, even in those, there's always something where in the first book she wasn't a Christian, but he was. By the end of the book, she is, and now they're dating. So it's that sort
So
of
it
thing.
all comes together. You can meet your
Oh,
person at church for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Well, and so I'm interested also in you are thinking about different series and different plot lines coming in. How are you like what's next? I know coming up you have your I guess your intensive writing as an official empty nester and
Mhm.
voice from the other side. My youngest daughter went off to college last year. I did not have the time that I thought I did, so
Mm.
don't worry about the expectations. Just let it happen.
Let it happen.
But how do you what is next for you besides this book? Do you what else are you hoping to achieve?
Well, one of the things that I do at The Advocate is we started in late 2017 a small publishing company called The Advocate Press. And so we've
Oh,
published to date 40 titles. Our most recent book just came out last week. Our bishop wrote his memoir. He grew up in extreme poverty. So that's been one of our best-selling books. And so that's something that has been exciting is learning the publishing world better, and
yeah.
trying to understand that and trying to bring some more of these stories to life, because there's a lot out there. And the closure of some brick and mortar stores and the publishing industry
Mhm.
has changed a lot since COVID. So I find it really fun, and I love doing it. So as a newspaper editor, I also do layout and design and all of those things, and edit and write and everything. So that's something that has been exciting to bring to the newspaper. And so I'm focusing on that. Um, Personally, I am looking to go in a different direction. I had written a secular novel about 18 years ago, and
Mhm.
it ended up. I got an agent, and it just didn't end up going anywhere. And I'm thinking of turning it into a Christian novel and changing a lot of it, but it's the same sort of thing, and it's set in a different place. It's set in the mountains, so it's called Where There's Smoke, and it's a little bit of a suspenseful type book, but I'm thinking of making going in that direction as well. So
Oh, that's
we're
so
looking pretty close.
interesting. Well,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I mean, being having a publishing imprint through The Advocate, I think is such an interesting and transformative move. So, are are your books actually, I should know this, but are your books published through The Advocate or do
No.
so that's so you're applying knowledge that, as an author and now you're able to bring that
Yeah.
to The Advocate imprint.
Yeah.
How are you sourcing books and what do you how does The Advocate publishing house work?
So I started while I was waiting for my books to get published. I thought, I should learn more about the industry. And
Mhm.
the Advocate being an independent entity, our funds were going down, what we had received from our state, our annual conference every year. And I am not so much an events person. I'll go to them, but don't ask me to plan one. So I thought,
It's a
what if
lot.
we were to come up with another revenue source? And what if this were something, what would this look like? So we actually put together a book called Stories of Racial Awakening. And it was
Mhm.
kind of a compilation book of people's narratives of, maybe they were raised in the 1950s in the South, and they had one view of race then, and then now they have a completely different view. They've awakened. And so put that together. And I learned how to essentially become an independent publisher, how the Advocate could do that. And so we have a books committee. We do print on demand, which is honestly what most publishers do now. Most
And it
publishers,
makes total sense,
yeah,
like, between Kindle and print on demand.
yeah.
And does that lower the risk profile, essentially?
Does, very much. So we don't, there's a lot of effort that goes into everything, but a lot of the effort is cost free. It's just things that we do. We'll either have volunteers, myself, I'm on salary. So it's, when we have a little spare time, we'll work on another book. I have another one sitting on my desk to work on later this week when I have a moment. But being able to do it and make sure it's excellent, understanding things like layout and what are good, profitable covers and what are eye-catching things and how do you do that? So that's been really fun. Just being able to do that. And my own books are not published through the Advocate Press just because it didn't seem like the right platform for them. But
Mhm.
I wouldn't rule it out in the future. I have some books that have been published that I wrote for the Advocate Press to be helpful, a couple of devotionals and things like that. But yeah, I look forward to growing as a publisher, and,
Mhm.
uh, there's a lot of opportunity, and we're a traditional publisher, meaning we actually pay royalties to our authors. We don't have them fund it, so we're not like a publishing service, and so that's a neat thing, just to help get more God-centered books out into the market.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on the program to talk a little bit more about that and some of your new releases. That sounds really interesting.
Really
And I
fun.
think so helpful for other, ACP members who, you know, there's content, there's ways to get it out. So,
Yeah.
it sounds like you are doing amazing things. I'm really excited to read your books. I was only able to skim a little bit, because of time pressures, but I am excited to read them, and I really appreciate you coming on the program to talk to me.
Pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's been great. Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Associated Church Press podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Follow us on social media for updates, member stories, and more from the ACP community. Until next time, keep telling the stories at the intersection of faith and journalism.